welcome to this presentation of wealth creation, a transaction-based view. The reason why I'm doing this standalone lecture on the transaction-based view is that it forms the centerpiece of all business activities. It defines the strategy for the company, it defines the way in which the business model works, where the competitive advantage is created for the business, and it gives us a touchstone, if you will, in terms of leadership decision making, in terms of who to employ, the kind of assets to buy, and the kind of business model that we are attempting to create as leaders in business. So the transaction-based view lies at the very heart of management, and it's not, where did it come from? It comes from research done at Oxford University in the UK. It comes out of my research from the University of Surrey in the UK. We've published a book on this, my wife and I, and it's not found, generally speaking, in strategy or other functional level textbooks. So this is an add-on to your textbooks. But it's an essential add-on in our view to understanding how all the parts, the components, valuable components you will find in the textbooks fit together in the creation of a competitive transaction. So the idea here is that there is only one event that occurs where a new wealth is created, and that is a transaction. And the reason for that is that the supplier surplus and the customer surplus only come about through a transaction. So what is a transaction? A transaction is a situation where you have a supplier and a buyer or a customer, and the customer is attempting to satisfy a need. And the buyer is attempting to create a product or a service that has attributes which the customer will view as being appropriate and desirable for satisfying that need. And so the conditions for a successful transaction then is we have to have a buyer, we have to have a seller, we have to have a need, and we have to have output that meets that need from the seller. We then also need to have the means of exchange, and the buyer needs to have the capacity to actually take ownership of the output from the supplier. So there is a transfer of ownership, the rights of ownership, either in the service or in the physical product as a result of the transaction. So there's a legal component to it as well, and law of contract, which we won't go into, but it is still a component of the transaction. So essentially what we're trying to do as a business is to create sufficient incentive for the customer to transact with us and buy our output rather than buying it from the competition. So how do we do that? Well, we need to create an incentive for the customer. And that incentive is known as the customer surplus. And that customer surplus is the difference between the total utility that the customer expects from the transaction minus the price or the purchasing power foregone to actually take ownership of the output from the supplier. So that is the essence of our competitive advantage. Are we creating greater levels of total utility for the customer and charging a price that leaves the customer, when he looks at the offer on the table, if you will, he sees a greater surplus coming from us, in other words, a greater benefit for him or her, than in fact either using a substitute product or service or in fact buying it from our competition. So the essence of competitive advantage really lies in the manner in which and the degree to which we can in fact create a customer surplus, a customer incentive to transact with us rather than transact with anyone else. For the supplier, there also needs to be a surplus. That's their incentive. If there isn't a sufficient incentive to produce the service or the product, then of course the supplier won't engage in the transaction either. So those are two necessary conditions: a sufficient incentive for the customer to transact with us, and a sufficient incentive for us to actually create the output for the customer. So the total wealth in the transaction then is actually the combination of both the customer surplus and the supplier surplus. And the supplier surplus is what the accountants really record in the books of prime entry and make up their trial balances and their profit and loss accounts and balance sheets and so on. That records the supplier surplus. But from an economic perspective, we cannot ignore the requirement for a customer surplus, a sufficient incentive to transact with us. And so the supplier surplus is a necessary but not sufficient condition. The customer surplus is a necessary but not sufficient condition for a transaction to take place. And remember, if there isn't a transaction, there is no new wealth created. And if the transaction takes place not with us but with our competitors, then the wealth in fact doesn't come to us, it goes to our competitors. And so as managers, as leaders of businesses, or as entrepreneurs, we are attempting to create a customer surplus or incentive, if you will, that is larger than any alternative that the customer may have to satisfy their needs. So we need to unpack this a bit more. We've got total costs as well. From a supplier point of view, managing total costs is essential. Why? Because that gives us the ability to strategically manage our pricing. And if we can have a total cost advantage relative to the competition, then we can, all other things being equal, we will gain a higher rate of return on our capital than our competition. And that leads into sustainability of our business. So the customer surplus, let's take a look at that. The total utility is really the focus of the transaction, the initial focus of the transaction. And so so marketing, if we have to look at this from a functional level, marketing is absolutely essential to us to define what attributes we should be producing that in fact create the best possible total utility, or a competitive level of total utility for the customer. So so we very much rely on marketing to say, well, what are the needs and what are the attributes by which the customer wishes to satisfy those needs? And that, of course, is the definition of utility from the customer's perspective. To what degree will these attributes that I'm paying for satisfy my needs? And of course, the greater these attributes satisfy the needs, the more utility the customer is experiencing. So those are really fundamental marketing questions. It's surprising to me how often marketing departments who have this strategic responsibility actually do a poor job in defining, first of all, customers' needs, and secondly, the kinds of attributes that the customer is looking for, and the performance on those attributes that the customer is looking for from the supplier to actually meet those needs. So that's so let's dig into that a bit further, and let's take a look at this through an example. So this is the application of the transaction-based view, and the scenario here is that General Motors and Toyota have introduced a new sports utility vehicle, the General Motors version and the Toyota version. So the question we're asking here as strategic managers is who's going to make the most profit from this, and who's going to gain the most market share from this. So we need to start by analyzing the total customer utility. And if we say that you walk into a General Motors showroom, you are immediately interacting with the attributes that that General Motors showroom has in fact created. Here we're talking about the way you welcomed, the ambience of the showroom itself, and the general manner in which you are being treated in the General Motors showroom. So those are all attributes which are important, which may or may not be the most important, but they are also part of this collection of attributes that you are evaluating in terms of what degree will my need be satisfied, what utility value am I going to get from General Motors. And then of course you have the core product itself, which is the SUV, which has a design, it has a lot of physical features, and each one of those will be evaluated consciously or subconsciously in terms of the degree to which they satisfy your particular need. And of course, everyone has a different set of priorities when it comes to attributes. And that's the very interesting thing about this whole approach, is that it gives us a means of segmenting the market, not based on age or income or family size and so on the demographic features of the potential market, but based on the actual attributes that are the drivers of the choice of the customer to either buy from General Motors or to buy from Toyota. So we can segment the market based on groups of customers who have the same set of preferences, and between the groups there is a significant difference in the rank, order, and weighting of those attributes by the customer. So here we have, and again this is purely theoretical, and it's got nothing against either General Motors or Toyota, but I'm just using this as an illustration. Excuse me. And so the total customer utility for General Motors has a monetary value here of $50,000. That's the degree to which the attributes on offer, both the tangible and intangible attributes on offer by General Motors, satisfy the need that you have for an SUV. On the other hand, Toyota, maybe it's got some additional attributes, maybe it performs better on the same attributes as General Motors. Whatever it is, we find that Toyota has a $55,000 total utility. And so the Toyota has a $5,000 total utility advantage in the development of their customer surplus. So if the price is exactly, these two vehicles are launched at the same price, the customer incentive to do business with GM is less than the customer incentive to do business with Toyota by $5,000. Now that difference in incentive will translate into over time, will translate into a difference in market share between Toyota and General Motors. So if you're an executive of Toyota and you're looking at this situation, you've got to make a decision now. You've got strategic pricing options now because of that increased total utility. You can either say we're going to leave the price the same and just let the market share develop in our favor over time, or what we can do is we can raise the price by $5,000, and so that our customer surplus is the same as General Motors customer surplus, and we'll basically share the market, but we will in fact be making a $5,000 per unit increase in terms of our supplier surplus. We are making more money. We're having a better return on capital employed as a result of having designed and produced a set of attributes which is superior by $5,000 to General Motors. So that's how that works. You've got pricing options. We can either go for market share or we can go for profitability. If we look at the cost side of it, we can look at this. General Motors can produce this SUV for $30,000, and Toyota can produce this. They may have got further into total quality management. They may have done just-in-time used Kanban systems, reduced inventory levels for the same output relative to GM, and so on. And so their total cost per vehicle is $25,000. That's Toyota. So Toyota has another $5,000 advantage based on their total cost profile for the same SUV as General Motors. So if we add these two together, what we find is that Toyota has a wealth-creating advantage, which is the sum of the advantage of the customer surplus and the supplier surplus of $10,000. So again, we can price for a range, pricing range options for super profit, and pricing range options for market share growth. So we can now strategically price our vehicles. This is very important because as we go over the life cycle of the SUV, we may want to adjust the pricing to fit in with where we are on the growth of the product life cycle. So very important, we can now control our profitability, we can control our market share. And so in the early stages, typically in the motor industry, we would be looking for rapid growth in market share, because that means for our dealers that these vehicles will be coming back to the dealership using spare parts which carry very high profit margins. There'll be more vehicles out there consuming Toyota parts than they will be consuming General Motors parts. So, but then as we move through that product life cycle and we get into the mature phase, maybe we want to, or the high growth phase, we may want to in fact shift that price and have an improved profitability. So what else can we say about this? Well, if you're a General Motors executive and you find that at equal pricing you are falling behind in terms of market share, what are your options? Your options are in fact very limited, because with this kind of product, changing it takes a long time. We can tweak a few little bells and whistles on it, attributes, but basically we're stuck with what we've got. So the only option we have, of course, is to reduce the price. So if General Motors says we are losing out on market share, let's reduce the price, so that we at least match our customer incentive with Toyota's customer incentive. What does that do? It reduces our supplier surplus. So if we reduce the price by $5,000, it means that we are reducing our supplier surplus by $5,000. And so in terms of our return on capital employed, that means a reduction in our total capital employed. So now what we're into effectively is a price war. So if you're now a Toyota executive and you're looking at this, you'll say, well, what should we do? Okay, so they match the price. They come down by 5,000. They don't have to because they have got pricing options because of the superior total utility and total cost performance. But let's assume they do. And so we have a ding-dong battle going on, 5,000 reduced by General Motors, 5,000 reduced by Toyota, all the way down. And when we get down to $5,000 above total costs, what we find is that Toyota is making no profit. They cannot drop their price anymore, or else every SUV they sell just simply increases their total losses. But at that very low price, Toyota is still making a profit on each vehicle that is sold. So that's the nature of competitive advantage. Now, the point I want to make here is that it all depends ultimately on this red box, this customer surplus, this customer incentive. That's really what we are trying to do. And remember that the customer incentive is the total utility that the customer expects to receive from the transaction, perceives that they will receive from the transaction, minus the price they have to pay. That is the definition of the customer incentive, the customer surplus. And so there are three things that we are primarily concerned with in the development of a competitive strategy. Number one, the total utility that we are going to create for the customer through the attributes that we produce. Number two, the pricing that we're going to charge, because that then determines the size of the incentive for the customer to transact with us. And thirdly, the cost, the total cost of the production of those attributes. So now when we start to look at all of our strategic models, we have to ask the question, especially if we're doing a dynamic analysis, in other words, dynamic over time, how do changes in these other strategic models affect either one of those three key factors in our business model? And so that's what we're going to explore a little bit more here. This sits right at the very heart of our competitive advantage. So customer preference structures and wealth transaction-based view, we have different market sectors. Customer utility to customer segment one, we have these attributes we are producing, and the customers will weight these, and as a result of the weighting, we'll have a ranking of these attributes. That then sets up our definition of a particular segment. We have a different segment, they have different attributes that they consider as important, and we have a utility weighting on these attributes. By the way, there are research techniques whereby we can very accurately measure the utility weighting of each of these attributes. It's known as choice-based conjoint, for those who are interested in that sort of marketing research. And so then once we have defined our segments, our market segments, also known as latent classes, we then need to evaluate the potential size and growth rate of future transaction volumes in each of those sectors, and the nature of the attributes driving total customer utility. And so we've got to look at our competencies. Can we, in fact, do they match with what we consider to be an attractive market segment? And so we would have we would focus our resources, skills, and competencies on producing the particular preference structure that we're interested in. This means that as executives, we have to make some pretty hard choices. We have to say we will serve this kind of customer and not that kind of customer. And what I mean by that is this set of customers with this set of preferences, we are going to focus on. We're going to hone our business. We're going to shape our business around this set of customers' business attributes. And we're not going to shape our business around customers who want a different set of attributes. And and so we're going to become a highly customer-focused organization. We're going to shape our competencies entirely on those attributes that create utility value for that kind of customer. Now, because if we don't, and we try and get our resources to do all things for all people, we'll end up doing nothing for anybody. So the transaction-based view forces us to look at what are the attributes that the customer is looking for, and what are the top attributes that the customer is looking for to satisfy their needs. Just got to check on the time here. 10.1, that's okay. That's the outcome. That's the leadership choices that we have to make. And thereafter, once we've made those market-based decisions, we then have to follow through that with shaping our resources, the kind of people we employ, the skills that we have, to have an integrated set of skills and competencies and assets which deliver a high performance on the attributes that make up that particular market segment. So that's why the transaction-based view moves on and is the basis by which we make choices in terms of what are the competencies that we need in our firm. And so here we have the relationship between many different strategic management models which you will find in your textbooks. And what I've done here is to in fact relate them all to the transaction-based view, because that's the question we're trying to answer. If things are happening out in the broader environment in which our company operates, the industry and the broader environment, and there are changes taking place, the question we need to be asking ourselves, how do these changes affect those three essential elements of the wealth creating transaction, which is the total utility to the customer, the pricing, and ultimately the total cost. So that's what this model here is doing. So you will find in your textbook a model on PEST, 5 forces. You will find models on culture, structure, control, behavior, the value chain, capabilities, resources, and distinctive competencies. So you'll find models, a plethora of models in strategic management textbooks. What they will not do for you is actually position these in relation to wealth creation, such that you can now evaluate, you can interpret, you can place meaning on changes that are occurring in the political, economic, social, and technological environment, how it affects our industry and the 5 forces model, Porter's 5 forces model. And so that's all to do with strategic strategy formulation. And out of these changes, we define opportunities and threats. And those opportunities and threats are defined by changes are occurring in these models that give us the opportunity to increase the total customer utility and decrease costs, which give us the ability to manage our pricing, either in terms of market share or profitability. So, so that's an opportunity. A threat, of course, is just the converse. Things are happening out here in the broader environment that, in fact, are going to limit us, are going to erode our ability relative to the competition in terms of the total utility that we're offering the customer, or it's going to increase our total costs. So that's really the definition of an opportunity and threat. We define it by reference to the transaction-based view. Remember, no transactions, no wealth. It's as simple as that. And then, of course, we have the internal side of that. Strategy implementation. We have strengths and weaknesses relative to the threats and opportunities based upon an analysis of change in the environment on those three elements of the transaction-based view. And so we have culture, structure, control. We're looking for certain behaviors. Certain behaviors are supportive of our total utility to our customer, as well as supportive of minimum costs. And so we're looking for certain, as strategic leaders, we're looking to develop within our organization certain behaviors that are conducive to increasing total utility or decreasing total costs, so that we can manage price to give the customer a superior surplus. Hence, they come to us rather than going to the competition or using substitute products and services. And then, of course, we have the resource-based view of the firm and our capabilities. That all goes into the value chain. And so we have the resources and capabilities coupled to the behaviors we want to derive our distinctive competencies in producing a superior customer surplus at the lowest possible, total cost in the industry. So, so that's really positioning the transaction-based view in a galaxy of other strategic models. And so it makes sense of these other models. We can interpret changes in these models, and we can describe these changes in relation to their effect on our firm's wealth-creating potential through the transaction. Let me just go to the next slide. I think I have to go over here too. Let's see how this works. Oh, it doesn't want to change for me. Well, that's not very good. Well, I think you have got the gist of it. This is why I emphasize the transaction-based view. It's the mechanism by which we extract meaning from changes that we use in these other strategic models. So now, when you're coming to do a case study, for example, you need to look at the data within the case and reflect on changes over time in that data, and reflect on that in terms of what's it doing to our total customer utility, what's it doing to our total costs, and what's it doing to our pricing, and ultimately to our customer surplus, the customer incentive. So when you do a case study, yes, certainly use the PEST model, use the 5 forces model. Maybe the case study is focused on culture or structure of the company, or the control mechanisms in the company. And so then you would be talking about the effects of these things on behavior, how that affects distinctive competencies, and how those changes in distinctive competencies will affect our ability to create a superior customer surplus. So, yeah, use all of the other models, but ultimately tie it back to our wealth creating potential. And that's really what the guiding principle here is. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for my brief description of the transaction-based view. And hopefully that'll help you in your analysis of cases, irrespective of the discipline that you are in fact dealing with. Thank you very much, and all the best. Let me just move that back if I can.